pounds on me, so I got that fire on me. In the desert heat, I'm burning marijuana, trying to fill bags with green and blue cheese. In the city, the only thing that matters is the money, and that's the only thing I want, honey. I live the life that's crummy, so I want my gold like a day sunny. Once upon a time.
Hey, this is BRERXRABBIT, and this is the Mitra Blue episode series. And for today, we are going to be doing a book read. What book? We are going to be continuing Black Indians, a Hidden Heritage. So, we are going to be doing chapter 1 and continuing on, depending how much time is remaining. And we read the preface already. I believe the introduction as well. So let's get this chapter 1 started, and let's see how far we can go. Yeah. All right. If you know, I have history. Today, most Black Indians do not live in the forests or broad plains of the United States. Most do not inhabit governments, reservations set aside for Native Americans any more than most Indians do. To be sure, they crowd, for example, the Shinnecock reservations on New York's Long Island, but many more walk the crowded streets of nearby New York City. They are found in abundance in the cement caverns of Boston's, Chicago, Denver, and Cleveland, also Detroit. They have made a long march from farms, woods, and ranches to skyscrapers, subways, and ghettos. Most have arrived with only a faint recollection of their adventurous rural heritage and gallant ancestors. The people they met in school, at work, or play cannot appreciate their background because they know nothing about it. If you know I have a history, you will respect me. A Black Indian student told a conference of New York teachers in 1968. Her words still ring true. Those who assume that a people have no history worth mentioning are more likely to believe they have no humanity worth defending. A historical legacy strengthens a country and its people. Denying a people's heritage questions their legitimacy. Citizens celebrate this country's daring break from colonial rule and rejoice in the plucky Minutemen who challenged the British at Lexington and Concord. But a month before those historic skirmishes on the path of freedom, other Americans were pursuing the same goal. Slaves in Ulster County, New York, planned a massive armed rising. Perhaps they have heard the exciting patriotic talk about liberty and independence. Their liberation's plot involved slaves in Kingston, Hurley, Marbletown, and upwards of 500 Native Americans. Unlike the Minutemen, their shot was not heard around the world. Their bold conspiracies never found its way into our history books. These dark people in Ulster County, like thousands of others mentioned in this book, made their contribution to freedom to their immediate relatives and friends. But other Black Indians made their contribution to an entire U.S. society that deserve consideration. This is Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes photographed in 1938, like to trace his Native American and African ancestry. Langston Hughes is a African American and Native American in the 1930s, and around the Jim Crow era. He wrote poems about basically his time around. I want to say not white people, but yeah, it was a poem, a famous poem. I think we had to do at school. Like a study at school, we studied a lot about Langston Hughes. If I can remember one of his poems, it was about him being in the kitchen and observing how everyone behaved and stuff like that, if I can recall. But anyway, on the sunny night of March 5th, 1770, Crispus Attucks, a black Natick Indian, stepped dramatically into U.S. history in Boston. He was the first to fall in the Boston Massacre. Benson J. Loren, a 19th century historian, transformed Attucks into Nantucket Indian. To losing it seemed wrong to place an African American with Native American blood at the daring first moment of American independence. Paul Cuffey, a Dartmouth Indian with African percentage, became a wealthy merchant and ship owner in early Massachusetts. He married Alice Pickett of his mother Wampanoag Nation. But his great interest was in protecting fellow African Americans from discrimination in the United States, and he became the first black man to sponsor a migration of U.S. blacks to Africa in 1815. He personally paid for and led 38 settlers aboard ship Traveler to Sierra Leone. Kofi became the father of Black Back to Africa movement in this country. Yeah, I guess that's I don't know. I don't think. I guess they wanted to go. They wanted to go. You know. It was 38. Led 38 settlers aboard ship to travel to Sierra Leone. Kofi became the father of Black to Back to Africa movements in this country. Yeah, that was the time of. I remember that after this, slaves were free. But let's continue. Mr. Frederick Douglass. Well, it doesn't say Mr. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, a slave runaway with mixed African Indian and white ancestry, became the leading voice of Black America during the Civil War era and the decades that followed. His creed, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress," has inspired reform and revolutionary moments ever since. Douglass' name and accomplishments now adorn most history texts. And we are reading Mr. Frederick Douglass' book as well. I was not aware yet that he was Native American. I knew that he was mixed, though. Well aware. But how interesting. All right, let's continue. Langston Hughes, poet. Poet laureate of African Americans, like to trace his family tree back to Pocahontas. Oh, the Pocahontas gene. The Pocahontas. He was on the Pocahontas gene. Okay, mister. I didn't know that. All right. Langston Hughes, poet, laureate of African Americans, like to trace his family tree back to Pocahontas, and that tree also was a man who joined John Brown's famous raid on Harper's Ferry, and another who became a Virginia congressman. Hughes, a prolific writer of poetry, plays, short stories, novels, autobiographies, and newspaper columns, became the proud voice of Harlem, New York's black community. Yes, and I believe he was sponsored by the Boulets. Yes, he was sponsored by the Boulets. I don't know if I'm right, but I heard Mr. was sponsored by the Boulets. A lot of black famous artists or musicians, famous black, were sponsored by the Boulets, a black fraternity that made a sway in Congress. Anyway, allegedly, I don't know. Anywho, proud legacy. In the early centuries of their life in the Americas, black Indians often created a society that might have been a model for everyone. They demonstrated that there was another path through the wilderness than the one hacked out by European lust for gold, land, and power. Their communities provided bigotry did not rise naturally from America's soil. Its plains and waters, bigotry and the appetite for it were imported. They traveled the stormy Atlantic and were speedily transplanted and nourished by those who carried them over. If they had been of mind to Europeans might have learned something from the dark people they selfishly used. Instead, they gathered these people precious gifts and offered promises in return. Africans and Indians followed a tradition that rarely wrote matters down, but held to verbal promises. Europeans wrote many things down, but failed to keep their promises or treaties. What followed in the New World was the Titanic European battle for the control of dark people and natural resources. Europe marched out its best soldiers to secure continent. Oh, they did so. And subdue its people. The result was unending conquest and agonizing slavery. But beyond the pain were armed black Indians, communities named Hide Me and the Woods Lament for Me. They were home for some of our earliest explorers and pioneers. Families brought up their young, constructed homes, planted and harvested crops, took care of their elderly. They traded with neighbors, instituted religion, government, justice, and planned the common defense. These settlements not only provided women with an equality and respect unheard of in Europe's society, but elevated some to leadership. Two colonial Brazil black Indian communities were commanded by African women, and another African maroon settlement in 1826 in Brazil was ruled by a black woman named Seferina, who successfully led her forces against towns and plantations in Bahia. With few weapons, these alliances in the woods challenged the footholds Europeans built in the Western Hemisphere, using guerrilla tactics that would become famous in China and Vietnam in our own century. Red and black people defeated superior numbers and better equipped foreign armies. This they managed while moving their families out of harm's way. These dark liberators often provided that European rule in the Americas amounted to a thin coat of white paint over the seething dark empire. Before Patrick Henry shouted, "Give me liberty, give me death," black Indian Morons acted on this notion before Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal." Black Indians turned a stirring phrase into a hard reality before the Declaration of Independence, eloquently argued for the People Revolution against the unjust authority. Thousands of dark-skinned Americans had been fighting tyrants and slave hunters on two continents. For their audacity, black Indians face repression more ruthlessly. My bad. Let me start over. For their audacity, black Indians face a repression more ruthlessly cruel than any King George III imposed on the 13 original colonies. They were forced to carry on a longest, bloodiest battle for freedom in the Western Hemisphere. Repeatedly, they persuaded Europeans it was wiser to grant them independence, sovereignty, and liberty than to continue wars. European powers often learned this lesson late after they had wasted lives and fortune on the idea that these free colonies could be easily destroyed. Maroon wars outlasted the endless conflicts between rival European states. Neither side gave nor asked any quarter, or any prisoners were few. 4. Their part Maroons, even when captured and facing a terrible death, tried to protect their villagers. More than a century ago, a British report from Belém, Brazil, described how a captured Negro gave such an account of difficulties and dangers on the journey of his settlement that 33 out of the 40 foreign soldiers refused to accompany their captains. To prevent Africans and Native Americans from uniting, Europeans played skillfully on racial differences and ethnic rivalries. They kept the pot of anonymously spoiling. Oh, not anonymously. Animosity. Anger. They kept the pot of animosity boiling. Whites turned Indians into slave hunters and slave owners. And Africans into Indian fighters. Light-skinned Africans were pitted against dark-skinned, free against enslaved black Indians against pure Africans and pure Indians. Or pure Indians. Those who have put history into books have emphasized differences between Africans and Native Americans. For example, they have stressed that Europeans encountered Indians as distinct individuals and members of proud nations and Africans as nameless slaves. Little mentions is made of the enslavement of Native Americans, and nothing is said about the cultural similarities between the two dark people. In 1984, scholars Theda Purdue said, by emphasizing the actual exaggerated and imagined differences between Africans and Indians, whites successfully masked the cultural similarities of the two races as well as their mutual exploitations by whites. In the United States, Africans became central in the exploration of the new nation and the development of crucial fur trade, because they were more able to build a binding trust among Native Americans. White employed them as negotiators, and they did not disappoint. Africans, like Native Americans, cherished their own trustworthiness and saw promises and treaties as bonds never to be broken. In 19th century, a black Indian friendships limped on despite onslaught from white racial policies destructive to both people. It survives still in the legends of Native American nations and the stories and faces of people of color. Frontier myth and reality. Generations of young minds have been trained to think of life on the American frontier as a saga of white gallantry. Daring pioneers probed the wilderness. John Wayne cowboys whipped Indians to give us the USA. Children of every race rejoice in this version of frontier served up each Saturday afternoon at the movies. In the real wilderness, two dark people met and often united. They were not driven together by any special affinity based on a similar skin color. Their meetings were unwitting, arranged by their enemies, but the Europeans who exploited both. But in the retelling of our Western history, no one learned that Africans and Native Americans separately and together fought bravely for an America they knew was also there. Perhaps their story was trampled underfoot by their hard-riding European foes. In 1774, patriot James Madison wrote about a slave revolt. In the prominent such attempts should be concealed as well as suppressed. The Black Indian story has been treated as though it were massive slave rebellion. Its final burial came in the hands of a later white generation who shaped a heritage for books and movies that ended in all claims but European ones. These frontiers omissions lie at the heart of our cherished nation's myth. The tale of wilderness stands as the greatest American story ever told. It is the way We wish to see ourselves a frontier people, said the President Woodrow Wilson. It is so far the central and determining fact of our national history. The West is a great word of our history. The Westerners has been the type and master of our American life. Creators of this West did not want it sullied by in African presence of our subject to Indian claims. The frontier went from gritty reality to uplifting truth and finally to national legend. In the process, entire race disappeared from view. Its cast of heroic characters included only whites. If Europeans bravely conquered continents, it was not necessarily or desirable to show black or red people defying white authority to build their own communities in the wilderness. Racial stereotypes long pictured people of color and cowardly or childlike. How could red or black people be shown creating a culture in the wilderness, bravely rescuing the families and riding off to the sunset? There is another problem in the introducing a set of dark frontier heroes. Their love of liberty thrust them against some of the sainted U.S. figures. Thomas Jefferson, speaking of Indians, said we would never stop pursuing them with war, while one remained on the face of the earth. Andrew Jackson, the first great Democrat to reach the White House, and was first in a long line of candidates to win the presidency, boasting of his Indian fighting skills. Mr. Democrat. I'm just kidding, I added that. He waged a cruel war against Indian men, women, and children. He staunchly defended slavery and, like Jefferson, owned slaves. To save their families, black Indians had to fight off posses and armies launched by these nations' national heroes. Let's look at this. Native American lacrosse players. Lacrosse. That's crazy. Native American lacrosse players in Dallas, Texas before World War I. They playing lacrosse. So these are Native American blacks and Indians. You can tell. Yeah, you could tell. Crazy. Straight crazy. Anyway, distorting racial history, as teachers know, injures dark children. They live with a muted heritage. Despite black Indians' contributions to this land, neither black or nor Indian children nor their parents have awareness of this legacy. Like whites, Native Americans learned in school that Africans were content slaves and had no fighting traditions, certainly none that allied with them, with Indians. For their part, African Americans are aware of Indians in their family tree. But they probably assume that, like the whites lurking there, they are mere intruders. They were mere intruders. Such inaccurate belief hide a heritage worth exploring. Further, they divided people today who could benefit from the unity forged by their ancestors. When African Americans have pursued their genealogy, they have focused on their African roots and sought a meaningful black heritage. Children of the black awareness of 1960s have rarely cared to mention an Indian ancestry because this might have been as a denial of their African origins and the value of blackness. All this is a part of racial nightmare we have inherited. With her usual precision, and pride, Rosa Faye, a black Seminole living in Brackettville, Texas in 1943, clarified her people's background for pioneer research. Kenneth W. Porter, we's cold people. I don't say we don't has no Injun blood, 'cause we has, but we ain't no Injuns. We cold people. Oh, Indians. Hold up. We cold people. We don't say we don't have no Indian blood, 'cause we has, but we ain't no Injuns. We's core people. Injuns. It's country singing for Indians, and also Seminoles. Seminoles is a black Indian tribe based in Florida. Runaway slaves. Also red bone Indians too as well. You know, they was described as runaways. Seminoles like the college in Florida Seminoles, but in reality it's more red, maroon, black skin type. You know, maroon, brown, you know, red. But let's continue reading. A Navajo hunting party was photographed in 1880 in front of their trading post. This is a Navajo hunting party. Navajos hunting party. All right. Other Americans would benefit from re-examination of their family trees and a new look at their biological inheritance. The process may yield wonder and gratification where once grief and skepticism ruled. The ancestors of black Indians often created or died in the attempt. In American sisterhood and brotherhood we have tried to attain. They did this under terrible circumstances and in the face of armed oppositions. Had we paid proper attention to the unique model of friendship and loyalty, our common American history from Hudson Bay to Cap Horn might have been different, more peaceful. Our racial problems might have been more easily solved, even at this late date. We owe ourselves a rereading of fascinating legacy. Perhaps we can still learn from an act on this lesson. Maybe we can still learn from an act on its lesson. All right. They fled amongst the Indians. Let's read this next chapter. So we're reaching chapter 2. Chapter 2. Alrighty. All right. On July 13, 1984, the people of Roanoke Island, North Carolina, their names emblazoned on books, t-shirts, and silver commemorative medallions began year-long celebration. It is their proud claim that U.S. history began with British settlement on their island. Cultural events throughout the state announced America's 400th anniversary, and the U.S. government issued a special Roanoke voyage stamped. As citizens of a relatively new nation with a short history, we leaped at famous first and revealed in antique events. People feel that our earliest ventures, properly studied, can reveal motives and characters in pure form, and studied for a first colony on these shores could yield insight into the nature of colonization and to cast light on how and why this nation developed. Our schools spent much time studying our earliest European colonies. Teachers uses this focus to teach children simple objects lessons in their white ancestry, flinting determination to survive and to prevail. Let's read that over. As citizens of relatively new nations with short history, we leaped at famous first and revealed in antique events. People feel that our earliest ventures, properly studied, can reveal motives and characters in pure form. A study of a first colony on these shores could yield insight into the nature of colonization and cast light on how and why this nation developed. Our schools spend much time studying our earliest European colonies. Teachers use this focus to teach our children simple objects lessons in their white ancestry, flinting determination to survive and prevail. Ooh, what's this? Bill Pickett left and his black Cherokee brothers. So this is another picture of black Indians and his Cherokee. Yeah, brothers. Alright. If the children are of African or Native American descent, they learn that their ancestors lost badly and ingloriously. But that was all for the best anyway. The historical record often does not agree with these kinds of conclusions. The English newcomers sent Roanoke Island in 1584 by Sir Walter Raleigh are a case in point. What these pioneers did was self-destruct over their own love of possession. When a silver cup allegedly disappeared, the Roanoke men roared out of their tiny enclave, musket and torches in hand, to destroy their Indian neighbors' village and crops. This blazing display of European possession mania cut the colony off from the one local source of help. When the Spanish Armada severed the settlements, when the Spanish Armada severed the settlement's connection to British ports, it withered and died. Roanoke Island became famous as the lost colony. In light of this unacceptable object lesson for children, school texts prefer to begin U.S. history with another colony, Captain John Smith, Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. Captain Smith was sent out by a London joint stock company seeking profits from colonization. Smith sailed with an overload of failed aristocrats and settled on a land owned by Algonquin Confederacy. Trouble began when the newcomers refused to plant, build, or exert themselves. Iron pistols in hand, Captain Smith ordered his lazy gentlemen to work or starve. Time and again, the English were rescued from starvation through the generosity of the Algonquin Confederacy, which provided the corn and bread. The foreigners responded by refusing to share their advanced agricultural tools with the Indians, and violence soon broke out. At Roanoke Island, colonization proved let's read that over. At Roanoke Island, colonization proved a total failure. At Jamestown, what collapsed was European work ethic. No wonder some scholars decided that U.S. history did not begin until the arrival of hard-working pilgrims aboard the Mayflower in 1620. Leaping over events can avoid some unpleasant conclusions about early Europeans' motives and character and success. The first foreign colony on U.S. soil. If the first foreign colony on U.S. land is worthy of study, then another contender for this title also deserves consideration. Less than 2 generations after Columbus first landed in 1492, and while his son Diego served as governor of Hispaniola, an island of Spain in the Caribbean, a colony was started on the mainland of South Carolina. No one seems to want to celebrate or even mention its dramatic story, and this unfortunate it offers a feast of insight into some errors that still cast their shadow on our racial problems. In June 1526, Lucas Vanquez de Alon, a wealthy Spanish official in the city of Santo Domingo on Hispaniola, founded a colony near the mouth of P.D. River in eastern South Carolina, six decades before Roanoke Island, 8 decades before Jamestown, and almost a century before the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock. Alon began his North American dream. Alon's effort has been overlooked, perhaps because most people prefer to believe that U.S. life began with the arrival of English-speaking Anglo-Saxons living under the British law. Perhaps his settlement is neglected because his tragic faith death by mismanagement, disease, and slave revolt. Perhaps it unmentioned because it is unique rebirth in the woods by people not considered a valued part of the U.S. heritage. Loren began preparing for his great adventure in 1520 by sending Captain Francisco Gardino to locate a good landing site and build friendly relations with the local inhabitants. Instead, the captain teamed up with slave hunter Pedro Cortes while failing to survey, site, or build good relations with anyone. The two men captured 70 Native Americans and brought them back to Santo Domingo as slaves. The first Europeans acted on what is now U.S. soil was making slaves of free men and women. The two adventurers returned to Alon with stories of naming a great river in honor of St. John the Baptist and having cut Christian crosses in trees. Alon was not impressed with their seizure of 70 Native Americans and brought the issue to the attention of a commission proceeded over the Diego Columbus. The Indians were declared free and ordered to return, but Spanish records do not show whether the order was carried out. But they do show that Alon, to make amends with the natives who lost their loved ones, sent the slave Conquez, who started the problem. Once again, Conquez returned with the other captured natives he claimed had volunteered to serve as guides for the Spanish expedition. Meanwhile, Alon retained one of the original 70, Ferdinand Chicorano, as his New World interpreter. Impressed with his skills and understanding of the mainland, he brought Chicorano to Spain to meet the king. After this meeting, the king issued an order permitting Alon to sail for the coast of North America. The king's order forbade enslavement of the Indians and added, be very careful about the treatment of the Indians. 3 Dominican missionaries were sent along to protect Native Americans from Europeans. With this record as a backdrop, Alon prepared to launch an expedition to North America. After the delays, his fleet of 6 vessels sailed to Puerto de la Plata, abroad were 500 Spanish men and women, 100 enslaved Africans, 6 or 7 dozen horses, and physicians, sailors, and Dominican Midships and disasters dodged into Enterprise as it landed on the wrong coast, lost, and ships Chacorona deserted. The other native interpreters seized by Cortes as fled. The Europeans were also there on their own. Determined to succeed, Alon drove his people until they came to a great river, which was probably PD. Selecting a location in a low marshy area, Alon ordered his band to set up camp. He paused to name his settlement San Miguel de Guadalupe. When he ordered the Africans to begin building homes, he launched black slavery in the United States. The neighboring natives fled inland and kept away. It was probably enough for them that the same Europeans who had seized 70 of their loved ones had now returned with Africans in chains. Europeans arriving to exploit and land labor contrasted in many ways and peaceful natives. The Indians lived in harmoniously with nature and shared huge pine weather and insulted homes that slept about 300 people each. Europeans tried to construct homes that kept men and women separated rooms. Europeans wrote that these Indians lived long lives in their old age and robust. While European men dominated their women, Indian women doctors served their people plant juices to cure fevers. While native lives moved peacefully ahead, the foreigners slipped towards a crisis. Disease and starvation ravaged their colony, and internal disputes tore it apart. The river was full of fish, but few Europeans were well enough to fish. Then an epidemic swept the settlement, and before housing was in place, wintry winds blew in. Alon became gravely ill and died on October 18th, after having named his nephew Juan Ramirez his successor. But Ramirez was in Puerto Rico and the leaderless Spaniards split into bitter armed factions. Men drew swords and marched in howling winds to arrest and sometimes execute those who wished to become leaders in the colonies. Some survivors complained that in the midst of their tribulations, Africans became setting fires and Native Americans sided with the slaves and made trouble. In November, a crisis erupted when Africans rebelled and fled to the Indians. An authority on a slave revolts believes this was instigated by Native Americans angry over whites using their lands. Africans used the freedom in their own homeland, probably needed to prodding from outside to strive for liberty. They understandably fled a dying European colony and slavery and saw an opportunity to begin their lives in the woods among people who also hated slavery. The surviving 150 Spanish men and women, no longer able to face a freezing winter with shelter on their labor supply, packed up and left for Santo Domingo. It would be another quarter of a century before Spaniards would again build a North American colony with slave labor. San Miguel de Guadalupe was not a total failure. San Miguel de Guadalupe was not a total failure. As the first foreign colony on U.S. soil, the Europeans left for home after 5 months, but Africans remained to build their own society with Native Americans. In an unplanned way that history menders and Karens, a new community emerged in the woods, which also included foreigners from overseas. The Africans, this new mixed settlement, would soon have made many American models. In distant South Carolina's forests 2.5 centuries before Declaration of Independence, two people of color first lived the fires of freedom. They exalted the principles through neither white Christians or Europeans. They became the first settlement of any premises on these shores to include people from overseas. As such, they qualified as our earliest inheritance. This is no way of knowing how long the settlement remained free of European intervention. Within a century, March, white conquest would spill into lovely streams, forests, but while this Indian community lived, provided the Americans with an example of hospitality, peace as democratic camaraderie. All right, we're gonna stop there, and we're gonna highlight it to where we left off. So that was fun. So we're gonna highlight that, and we'll leave it right here. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that book read. I did. It was fun. Now, the next episode we'll probably switch it up a bit, but I'll try to keep the Milka book in play because we didn't finish the chapter. So, hope you enjoy, and see you in the next episode. This is BRERXRABBIT, and this is the Mitchell Blue Book Read.